back, YouTube. Part 2, we're going to be going over priming, painting, sanding, how to get that mirror-like finish, and then after part 2, we'll start moving on into the actual guts and making the crossovers. Okay, so to get started, just going to reiterate, these speakers have been put together, just type on 2. All the edges were sanded down with 400 grit sandpaper. Then we went over it with the wood glue and water mixture multiple times, ended up wet sanding multiple different grit sandpapers. Last coat was with 600 grit and just made sure the finish was really good. So first thing first, we need a primer. Make sure you get an actual primer and not a paint and primer all in one. Reason for this is primer is a very fine powder that is kind of sticks to itself, but it's not like paint. You can think of paint as like a liquid spray. Primer is like a more powdery spray, so kind of like that fake snow that you can buy. And we definitely want that because that will fill in all these little imperfections and gaps that you might have, any little slightly rough patches. Anyway, hopefully you can see there's a few little dents. I've been trying to hit them a bit harder with the primer and then just hoping I can sand it out. That speaker over there is a lot better, I guess, in that regard. It doesn't have as much as those, so I'm just not sure if I rushed sanding on this. I thought I filled it all. I didn't see anything when I looked it over with a flashlight, but a bit of extra primer should work. I'm using this just like Rust-Oleum primer. It's not the best. I mean, it works pretty well for covering, but it doesn't fill very well. There's a brand I've used before. It's kind of pricier. It's called SEM, S-E-M. Just check their primer's 20 bucks a can on Amazon, and this is like $3.50 or $4. So that's why I went with this. Okay, so I was able to get rid of the small little blemishes in the paint, and I'll explain how real quick, because it's not the proper way to do it at all. So with a really good epoxy like 2K primer, yeah, just keep doing even coats over and over until it's completely smooth. Sand your primer, you're good to paint. This doesn't work as well at building up. So I kind of just took the can of primer and did this right here. I'm not sure if you can see that. Basically just spray it directly on top, put a huge glob over it. I can just hear all the painters out there crying. That's okay though. Spraying it until the blemish is completely covered by a glob of primer. And then you're just going to wet sand the entire surface until the glob's completely gone. On this one, I went down until the wood was starting to show through again, which is okay. I was wet sanding, but we did the sealer beforehand, so it's not going to make the wood warp or anything. So that was my solution, and it worked really well. So I'm doing the same on that speaker over there, and I'm about to recoat this one with, like, I guess the final coat of primer. Oh, and I should also mention, if you're doing this the right way, instead of just spraying on more and more primer over and over to fill in these little imperfections, best bet would be to get small imperfection body filler, not like the 2 tubs of Bondo that you mix. I think it's called nitro filler. It comes in like one of those like tubes that are slightly metallic. You just squeeze the stuff out. It's normally red in color, and just take a credit card and you smooth it into your work surface. And then once it dries, you can prime over it. That would be the proper way to do it. That stuff's sandable and it's meant to fill in cracks. There's no real good automotive store around me. I didn't really feel like ordering something online, so that's what I've been doing with the primer. But yeah, if you're If you're doing this and you notice that there's a small imperfection or multiple small imperfections, it's a lot less work. It's probably a bit cheaper too to get the body filler. If you have like one small little pinprick kind of divot, then yeah, just spraying primer into it. It's good enough. But if you have like a large thing down the side, body filler would be a much better solution. If you do go the primer method though, just use a piece of cardboard. So like say for example, you're like spraying right here, shield the corner piece, like this angle, because if you get a drip on here, it's very hard to get rid of the drip without sanding through. And when I did these, I did the sealer first, so that's not too big of a problem if I sand through because I'm wet sanding. But if you don't do that and you do sand through your primer, you're going to be in a lot of trouble because your wood might start to warp, and then you're kind of screwed because there's a permanent defect in it.
Okay, so I have my respirator on. Hopefully you can hear me. This right here is why it's important to pay attention to what you're doing. My can was starting to run out of paint, so I started to spray. It wasn't spraying, so I looked at it, kind of shook it, and I started spraying again right there, not off the part, so it globbed up. I'm pretty sure you can see that, which isn't too big of a deal. I've been doing worse, and it sands right out, but it's extra work. So just make sure when you're spraying, start off the piece, go across, stop spraying, start spraying, go across the piece, stop spraying, and just go back and forth. Otherwise you'll end up with spots like that. Accidental or on purpose.
Just a real quick comment I wanted to make before the garage fills up with too many fumes. If you're painting a speaker, and you do, you know, like all the sides except for one, and then you run out of paint in your can, don't do the last side. If you do the last side, you're going to open up a new can of paint, and then you're going to wait for the paint to dry on the speaker, and at the same time the paint is drying in your nozzle. And new cans of paint have a much nicer spray pattern than a can that has a bit of paint clogged up. It's a lot wider, covers a lot more area, and comes out a tiny bit smoother than a can of paint with some dried paint on it. You get more of a narrow spray. It's not as fine misted. So just let the other side not get painted, and then wait for it to dry. When you come back, open up a new can of paint, start with the side you haven't painted, paint all the other sides on both speakers, and then just come back and hit the side that you did first the second time, and then you're all even on all your coats. That way your can performs better for all the other faces. Hopefully that makes sense. Ooh, look, all nice and perfect and ready to get paint on them. Just kidding. More fucking primer. Where did the speakers go? Dun dun dun! Yeah, so I have finished sanding the primer on all the sides down to about there. So just got to get the bottom on all for the sides and then the bottom face itself. So now is a good enough time as ever to pull up the plastic. Just blow out the garage with the leaf blower. Knock off any chunked on bits like on that one, the wooden blocks, and toss out the trash. So just do some general cleanup. That way once I sand the bottom, I don't have to worry about pulling them up again or anything like that, and I can just go straight to painting. Okay, speakers, all primed and sanded. Feels super smooth. I'm going to feel all the sides, just make sure I didn't miss anything. Don't think I did, but always good to triple check. Got the garage door closed to reduce any ambient airflow. I'm going to be using this Rust-Oleum white lacquer paint. And I'll be starting with the speaker that I went through a tiny bit on. I'm not going to deal with touching that back up. The paint should cover that fine. I've put way too much time into priming anyway, so Another thing to remember, the speakers are bottom side up, so that way when I finish doing the coats of paint and I flip them over, the side that's already painted is the bottom, so that way I'm not taking the top that's freshly painted and flipping that over and putting it on the ground. Okay, and as a quick reminder, anytime you're dealing with aerosol paints, that's like spray paints, spray primers, whatever, normally they contain toluene or xylene or some sort of organic non-polar solvent. So basically what that means is you don't want to be breathing it in because those are volatile. That's that nasty spray paint smell that people smell. So if you're painting in a confined space, make sure you have a proper respirator with the proper filters that can deal with organic solvents.
Alright, well there's the first coat. Doesn't look like much, but as the coats get added on, should start to look better. Hey, so I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier, but a good way to prolong the life of your spray cans if you're going like back inside for a bit, just turn it upside down, spray until you don't really see much coming out, and it prevents it from clogging up as much in your tip. It still does a tiny bit, which is why earlier I was saying if you're going to like spray a side and you run out, going to open up a new can. It's better just to have a fresh can, but if you are leaving, doing that will make it spray a bit more evenly when you come back.
Okay, so I've wet sanded the first box, haven't done the second yet. I've just been doing 400 grit sandpaper, and as you can see by the wear on the sandpaper, you do quite a bit of sanding. Now you definitely do not want to be pushing down while you're sanding. You want to just kind of like let the weight of the sanding block apply all the pressure. And you want to apply ample water, like an insane amount of water. This section right here, maybe just this top part, like you should wet your sandpaper, do that, re-wet it, move down. There's a lot of water in this process. I'm going to be doing another coat of lacquer, even though I didn't really cut through. I did in a tiny little spot, but it's on the back, so it wouldn't really be noticeable. I'm still going to do additional coats. I have those cans left right there, so I'm just going to do those. Additionally, just to make sure this paint is absolutely stunning, but I'll show you the finish real quick. So this right here, if you can see that, is after doing an initial sanding, whereas before with the paint, it's this popcorn kind of look. It wipes off pretty easily, and there wasn't really any on the top. Okay, so both speakers have been wet sanded with 400 grit sandpaper. They're pretty smooth. There are some spots on the bottom back on both where it cut through. Like I mentioned, not a problem. While you're working, make sure you take a dry washcloth and dry it off, but it's going to get wet by the end. So initially use the wet one once it starts to get wet, and then get a second one that's dry, and get most of it off with the wet one, then just dry it with the dry one. That way you can see your work area, what you still have to do, and if you've missed any areas. I want to wait for these to completely dry, then I want to come back down. I want to use an oil removing cloth to get any hand oil off of it. And I want to finish up with the other 4.5 cans of paint. All right, next step, I got these prep wipes. You can get these just at like auto body stores. I dusted off the sides with a shop rag, and now I'm gonna take one of these, just unfold it like so. I'm just gonna wipe down the sides of the speaker. I'm touching this side, wiping it down with that one. If for whatever reason you decide to do that indoors or something, be aware. It'll make your house or whatever smell pretty bad. Okay, so finished up the last coats of paint. Just gave it a few days to dry. Now, I would use 600 grit sandpaper to bring this down completely smooth. However, the hardware store that's by me stopped selling 600 grit for whatever reason. I guess not enough people were buying it. So I'm just going to be using 400 grit on this. Hey everyone, so basically done with this step. Once we've wet sanded and not had any cut throughs, we can go ahead and wait the 3 to 4 days and dust off our speakers with a dry microfiber cloth, and then use a prep wipe like this one right here that you can get in your automotive store in the paint section to clear off any oils. Once you wipe it with this, try not to breathe in the fumes and wear gloves if you can. If not, it's not too big of a deal, just don't breathe the fumes in. Wipe it down while it's still wet with another microfiber cloth that will get rid of any residual oils from your skin that got on during the sanding process. Now, quick retrospect, just to share my mistakes so you guys can learn. First off, spraying the primer on to get out small little things. It works, but there's a better way to do it, and that's body filler. That's the proper way to get out any issues. So one thing is this line right here that you can see between the side and front face of the speaker. It's not really too noticeable. I mean, you can see it. That's okay. If I would have used body filler, that would not have been an issue. So for those of you that are unaware, body filler is like a putty that dries hard. It's mainly used in restoring automotive paint jobs and damage to the car. You scrape it on, you use it to fill in gouges and stuff, and it dries to be hard. And then you can sand it just like you would primer. So the proper way to do it would be, once you do your first coat of primer, all of the small little mistakes and defects are going to show up. Take your body filler, fill in any mistakes that you see, like this crack down here, and wait for it to dry. You can then go ahead and sand it. Body filler is like an ugly pinkish red color normally, but that's, fine, whatever. We're going to cover it anyway. So once you sand your body filler, you spray another coat of primer, and you see if there's any more mistakes. If there is, use more body filler. You repeat this process until you do a coat of primer and it looks completely smooth. And then you move on to actually putting multiple coats of primer on, like I did. So that's one step that I'd recommend. Another step, go with a different color of primer. I was really concerned if I was cutting through to the primer because I just couldn't tell. So on the bottom of one of these speakers, I actually sanded a spot pretty much down to the wood, just so I could see what cutting through looked like, because this is the first time I've used this lacquer paint from this brand. So if you use something like a gray primer, you could tell a lot easier if you're cutting through, which would have made it a lot easier. So those were the two recommendations I'd have. So this is the last thing you really need to do, just the wet sanding, prep wipe it down. Once you've done that, we're basically ready to start our clear coat. Yeah, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I will try to answer them as quickly as I can. Have a great rest of your day, and thanks for watching.